Thomas, and today I am building the Initiator mid-power rocket from Aerotech. And Aerotech has lumped all of their mid-power rockets now into the Enerjet brand, and so I'm going to use those two brands interchangeably here. Also, it's got some upgrades on here now, so in the past when they've done this, they haven't always upgraded the instructions, so we'll see how this goes. But these upgrades actually make it easier to fly. So as always, we'll go ahead and open this up and make sure we have everything. Now that box was kind of bulky, so I took everything out. And in the main body tube, we also have some more stuff. So there's our engine mount tube. The instructions are packed up in here. And coming out the other end, we've got the decals. Okay, so first of all, we've got our main body tube here. And it is pre-slotted for the fins, although you may have to use a hobby knife or just your fingers to remove the tabs here that aren't quite through. We'll do that in a little bit. Let's go ahead and check our instruction sheet here. Okay, now some of these, like this motor adapter they show here, are not included anymore. Okay, so instead, with the screw-on retainer they have here, the motor adapter is just a ring that goes with this. And so this is found in the little kit here. Alright, it might be inside here. So this little thing here goes over a 24mm composite motor, and then that simply goes in to the motor tube, and then this goes on as usual here. We'll come back to this when we actually mount this onto the rocket. For now, I'm just going to put this back in its bag. Okay, but be aware some of these things in the instructions are no longer relevant with the new thing, the new retention system. Okay, so really there's no motor adapter tube, there's no adapter rings, there's no e-spacer tube. All right, no thrust ring. This is all built into the new motor adapter there. So coming down our motor tube right here. Okay, there's no motor hook. All right, now the fin lock system and fins are all in this main bag here. Now inside this bag is mainly all of the stuff for the fin assembly. So we'll go ahead and pop these out. Okay, now coming back to our parts list. Alright, we've got some centering rings here. These are all gray fiber. The fins themselves right here. And then these are the fin lock rings. Alright, cooling mesh. When this is fully installed, this takes the place of recovery wadding, so you don't need wadding with this particular rocket. Ejection gas baffle, that's this part. And then we've got a elastic shock cord. Alright, got our body tube there. Alright, our nose cone right here. Alright, decal sheet, parachute, F-spacer tube, which I believe is this. Okay. Now, what comes with it, these are launch lugs. They're square, but they're still 1/4-inch launch lugs. And then these are the rail guides that come extra. Okay, so you can use either or both. Alright, so I'm going to gather most of this up and set it aside, and we will get started here. Before I do anything else, I'm going to go ahead and remove the little pieces from the fin slots. these two small slots are for the launch lugs. And so if you're not going to use the launch lugs, you might want to just leave those in place and maybe even put a little cyanoacrylate glue over them to keep them from falling out. So the other ones, the rail guides here, these just glue on. And so you could glue them on over the slots. They're not quite the same length. I'm going to go ahead and put the launch lugs on and then likely put on the rail guides as well. So I've got a wider variety of launch system availability. Now, the fins here are plastic and they snap in eventually. You might want to think ahead though about how you want to decorate the rocket. So for example, if you want your fins a different color than the rocket body and or the rocket's nose cone, I would paint them ahead of time and then also paint the body tube ahead of time and then do all the assembly. That way you don't have to do as much masking. Now if you do that, when you're painting the fins, mask off the fin tabs. The rest of it's fine. In fact, you'll want to even have a little bit of paint on the root edges here, just so little lines and such don't show through. Now on the box, this shows a red nose cone and a white everything else. Let's see if I can get this under a little bit better here. So it's kind of a big box. Okay, so if you want to go with the colors shown on the box, you can go ahead and put the fins on, paint the whole thing white, and then paint the nose cone red to match this part of the decals here. All right, and I am likely going to do that, so in my case I'll go ahead and paint the whole thing white and then paint the nose cone red. But if you want different colors, you can certainly do that. Next, we're ready to assemble the motor mount, and this came within the instructions here. So we have to do a little bit different things here. So first of all, the motor adapter section we skip entirely. Okay, and then on the motor tube assembly, alright, we don't do steps 1, 2, and 4 because we don't have a motor hook and we don't have thrust rings here. And then for step 3, we're modifying the locations here. Okay, so we're not going to use these measurements and locations back in here. And just to make sure I don't confuse myself later, on the inside of the motor tube here I'm writing aft. So that's the back end of my rocket. All right, and using the line here because it's convenient. All right, we need 1.5 inches, which is right here. Alright, and then 3 9/16. Okay. So that would be right here. Here. Okay, so first we're going to put on the fin lock rings. So that would be the two black ones here. Okay, and this notch here was originally for the motor retainer, which we don't have anymore. But I'm still going to use our line here to line things up. Now that's not wanting to go on, so here I'm just going to kind of chamfer the outside corner edges here with my thumb, just to make those go in a little bit easier, if at all possible. Okay, and if they're still too difficult to get on, then they recommend using some sandpaper on them. So I've got a little bit of 150 handy. Alright, and they're just suggesting to round the edges here so that hopefully they go on easier. Make sure I'm on the aft end again. Alright, and then we'll slide the first one up here. Okay, so the front edge of the ring should go right at that 3 9/16. And I'm going to align the slot there on its edge. And it doesn't really matter which way it goes, just be consistent about it. Alright, we'll see if this one will go on without any aid. Nope. So we'll give it a little bit of rounding here as well. There we go. Okay, and this is going to be the front edge of the aft ring. Right there. Okay, and then we want to make sure especially that the fin tabs here, the fin slots here, are aligned, because that's going to be a whole lot more important than whether or not the non-existent retainer that would go in here is lined up. Okay, so now I'm going to grab a fin. Okay, mainly I'm just going to use this to make sure we're lined up properly, but I also want to show you something here. Okay, so something is out of alignment. Oh, okay, this one, the forward ring, that should be the back edge. So I'm going to move this up a little bit more. Okay, so there's my mark again, and this should go here. Alright, which is one of the reasons you should always dry fit this stuff. Alright, but this extension here of the fin tab is going to go in between those two rings. So the rings have to be far enough apart to do that. Now, it's hard to see this when you've already got this mounted inside the tube, so I'm going to do it here. When you actually go to mount this, it has to push until those click. And when you've got the body tube out here, it gets really difficult. So just keep that in mind when you're putting the fins on, is make sure you hear them click into place, because it's going to try and go to about there, and it gets really, really resistant. Alright, next I'm going to put on the centering rings here, and for now this is just going to be a test fit. So I'm going to go ahead and slide one on here on the aft end, and it's going to align with this. Now again, it's not critical since we don't actually have that retainer on there. Alright, and then we'll go ahead and align this one like this. Okay, and now, just to make sure everything is good, we're going to put all the fins on. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and put that one on there. Okay, so everything's straight. And if we go back to our instructions here, alright, now that we've ensured that the fin lock rings are where they need to be, we're going to carefully take these back off. I'm taking a special care not to move those black rings. Alright, and for now, that aft ring can come out. And what they're showing is we're not going to move things, we're going to apply beads of cement here. And I'm actually using a gel type because I'm not quite ready to say that regular super glue is great for building models. Alright, now I'm going to stay away from the clip slots there, just so I don't accidentally get some in there. Alright, so that forward ring can go right up against there. Okay, and then we're going to do this, we're just going to put some basically super glue fillets in here. Now that one is a little bit close for comfort. Move that out of the way. In fact, I will probably just run out of super glue there. I think the one thing I'm kind of worried about here is if that super glue builds up, and that might interfere with the fin tabs reaching all the way down. So let me go ahead and remove some of that. Alright, now on the forward part it's fine. It's not going to hurt anything. But I think here we're going to want a little less. Here instead I can just use some regular consistency super glue, and we'll still try and keep it away from the slots there. Okay, and then on this one we're only going to do the inside at this time. Alright, now I'm going to let those dry for a few minutes and then come back and we'll continue with the baffle assembly. While the glue is setting up on the fin rings there, I'm going to draw our attention to the nose cone. Now if you look at this closely, it's got a seam on each side of it here, and that's where the mold was. And you've got a few options here. You can just ignore this, or you can sand it. You can even add some putty to it to fill this in. That's all completely up to you. The other thing is this is either polypropylene or polyethylene, and those plastics don't adhere paint very well. And so there's a few things we can do to fix that. One is to sand it, and so I am going to start sanding with some 150 grit sandpaper. And I'll do this sanding dry, and mainly I'm going to concentrate on these two lines here. Okay, just remove the dust. So this line I've got mostly gone. And then the other line's a little bit deeper, so I'm going to give that a little bit more sanding. Also make sure you get the tip. This is one of the places where paint tends to start falling off, is right at the tip. So make sure you give it a little sanding as well. Alright, and I'm going to come back to my lines here and continue on the places that still show. Okay, so let's remove most of it. There's just a little bit of a hint of a line here that's fairly deep in the plastic. And you can continue sanding this, although you don't want to sand it too much more or that you'll weaken the nose cone. And so a couple other options here is you can use some plastic model putty like this. Although even with this, it doesn't stick to the polypropylene or polyethylene that well. It's better than nothing. But you can also use a filling primer here, and that's what I'm going to do. Now before I move on, I'm going to go ahead and sand the rest of this very quickly and lightly with the 150 grit because having all these scratch lines there is going to help the paint stick. Now I will wet sand this with some finer sandpaper, but here I'll just get it started with the 150. Quickly make sure you don't have any glossy spots left. Alright. Now next I'm going to wet sand this, and usually I do this off camera because I do it with a running water in a sink, but here I'm going to change the setup a little bit so you can get an idea of what I'm actually doing to wet sand. Okay, so this is casting a bunch of reflections all over. Hopefully this will work. So I've just got a basin of water here. As I said, normally I would just do this in a sink with a little bit of running water, but this will work. You're going to need some wet dry sandpaper. So this usually has either a black coating or some of them have a purple coating. Just look for wet dry sandpaper in your hardware store or wherever you're getting it. All right, we're going to moisten this. Now I'm starting with 220. And just using that moistened sandpaper, now I'm going to sand all the way around, frequently picking up more water. And the water is helping to lubricate the sandpaper. So not only does it sand faster, it sands smoother, and it prevents the sandpaper from clogging up. Because especially with plastics, you're generating a lot of friction here, and that partially melts the plastic and then clogs up your sandpaper. Okay, and then I'm just going to move up the length here. So there's some initial. I need to do more here, but I'm going to go ahead and take this away now and do it under the sink. It's just a lot easier. Some people will take this up to about 400, even 600 grit sandpaper to get a really smooth finish. In my case, I'm going to save that really smooth finish for after I prime it. So what I'll do here is I'm going to go off camera, finish my 220 sanding, and then I'm going to spray prime this with two types of primer. One's called a universal bonding primer, and that's just what it sounds. It helps other paints stick to hard to paint things like polyethylene and polypropylene. And then once that is dry, I will overcoat that with a filling sandable primer, and that will help fill in the scratch marks from the sandpaper, as well as some of those line remnants there that I couldn't quite get rid of. And then we can sand that with the finer grit sandpapers, and it can be wet sanded as well. And that will give us the smoother finish we're going to want before we paint. So here's the nose cone after it's been wet sanded with 220 grit. It's smoother than it was after the dry sanding, but you'll still be able to feel a little bit of texture there. You can still see a little bit of the mold lines. Not too much though, those should get filled in. So I'm going to make sure this surface is completely dry, and then off camera I will start the priming process. Okay, now we're going to come back to our motor mount system here. So our glue has been mostly dried, at least on these. And so coming back to our instructions here, alright, we're going to make a few cuts here, and it usually doesn't take much, in the forward end, and that's going to make this piece slide in easier, because it is a little bit tight there. So I'm just going to make a few cuts. I'm just going to start with two of them, about 1/4 inch or 6 millimeters down, and see if that's enough. Yeah, that's enough to slide that in. Okay, so now we're going to take this stuff here, so this wire mesh, we're just going to tease apart into kind of a longish wire slug, if you like. Alright, so they say to stretch this out to about 6 inches. Alright, we want the mesh to end about right there. That way, if you get a longer composite motor in there, it won't be impacting the mesh directly. Okay, so now you can just see it down there. Alright, so now we want some super glue on the inside here, and I am going to use the gel type super glue for this, because I really prefer it for mating dissimilar pieces here. I'm just going to run a bead. Whoops, that's a big bead. We'll just kind of smear that around there. Okay, and then we're going to stick that right there. Okay, and then we're also going to take this screw eye and screw that into this, and it's not very tight, so once I get it screwed in there, I'm going to back it out again. I'm going to put a dollop of super glue in there, and now screw that back in. Okay. Now, the third centering ring, so we have one on the aft and one right there. The third centering ring is going to go up on like this. Okay, and that also will require super glue. It doesn't matter where that notch is for this one. So here again, I'm just going to put a bead of super glue around this forward baffle plate there. We're going to stick that right on, and it should center itself. Alright, we just don't want so much that's oozing all over the place, but I don't see any oozing. That's good. So now I'm going to let this whole thing dry again. Now it turned out I didn't have any of my universal bonding primer on hand. This is the filling sandable primer. Now you'll notice it looks like it got really fuzzy in here, and that's actually normal when you hit the primer coat over the sanded plastic. This will go away when we sand it, and basically the primer is helping to lock that plastic into place and make it easier to sand. Now I'm going to use several coats of the primer here before I give it its first sanding. That sanding will be wet sanding at 320 grit, and then I'll put another coat or two on there and sand it at 320 and possibly even 400 depending on how it looks. Here my rings are dry, and the next step is to attach the shock cord here. Alright, so to do that, we just unwind our shock cord, and according to the instructions we're just going to tie one end to this eye here, and then this will extend out the front of the body tube. And you can do that. I'm going to change this just a little bit. So I'm going to add some Kevlar as the base for this, so that if my elastic then gets worn out, it's easier to change than trying to change it back here on the eye that's going to be about halfway down the body tube. So for this, I'm going to get a piece of Kevlar line here. This is 350 pound test, which is actually a lot thicker than you need. 100 pound test is too small in diameter and will tend to zipper things easier. If you got anything from about 200 test on, that's probably going to be fine. Again, this is optional. So I'm just going to cut this here. All Alright, now I'm going to tie this onto my screw eye, just using a double knot here, 2 overhand knots, 2 half hitches. Okay, and you want a little bit free out here. You don't want that free end all the way up to the knot, but you don't want to waste a lot of it either. So I'm just going to pull this tight, and then I'm going to put a little super glue on the knot. Alright, and this is just regular viscosity super glue, and just let that soak in there a little bit. You can also put some out here on the frayed end. Now on the other end, I'm just going to tie a loop here, and then I will tie my elastic cord onto the loop. And make that a little bit bigger. That's pretty good. Okay, tighten that down really well. And then the same way, we'll just add a little bit of super glue to that knot, and then onto the frayed end there. And just to speed things up, I'm just going to add a little alcohol to those to act as a super glue accelerator. And then I can go ahead and take my knife here, and I'm going to cut off this frayed part. Just like that. Okay. So now when we put this in, if I've got all my measurements right, alright, this should extend to just above the body tube like that. And that's what we want. We are now ready to install the motor mount and the fins. So first, just take however you put the shock cord on. If you use the full elastic one, or if you did like I did here and just made a short Kevlar base, we'll just slide that in. Okay, and then we're going to slide in our motor mount. Alright, if it seems strange, it is. We're not putting any cement on the centering rings. Alright, now if you're having trouble like I am there, you can just go ahead and kind of chamfer out this edge again. Like that. Okay, and up, I got a little bit paper there. I thought I'd got all this out. It's for the launch lug. Okay, and we need to make sure that the slots here are lined up with the slots on the tube. And this is why we have not put on that last ring yet, is we'll be able to see down inside and see what's going on. Alright. Now, one thing to keep in mind. I'm actually going to put on both the launch lugs that fit into these slots and the rail guides. Now, if you're just using one or the other, you could take the rail guide and use the slots as a guide to put them on. You just glue them on like that. But since I'm using both, I need a line to guide where I'm going to put those. So what I'm going to do here is take a pencil, and you can either just eyeball this or you can take a tape measure here. Here I'll use a flexible tape measure, and I'm going to go from the outside of that slot to the outside of this slot. So that's about 7.3, 7.4. So if we call it 7.4, that's going to be 3.7 centimeters to the middle. So that's going to be right there. Alright, and now here you can use a door frame or a drawer or a tube marking guide like this one. Okay, we just need a straight edge here. Now the launch lug goes up to about here, so that's where I'm going to put my line. So I'm just going to go to my mark here and draw a line down the body. Okay, and that'll be a guide now for when I put on the rail guides. Now again, if you want to paint the fins a different color than the rest of the rocket, you might want to do that ahead of time. I'm going to have my fins white like the rocket, so I'm going to go with the suggested color scheme on the package, more or less. Okay, got some marks there, that's fine. So the first thing I'm going to do is make sure that I'm aligning. So if I get where we can see this here. Okay, so I've got a fin coming in through there. Alright, and that should be able to pop in right there with the clips, and it does. Now I'm not going to push it all the way in yet. What the instructions tell us to do is put glue all along the base, the root edge here. And then you can also put glue here, here, and here. Okay, so we're going to have lots of glue on this. Now again, the instructions call for super glue, and I'm using a gel type super glue here. I think that one needs to be poked open. If you want to use epoxy, there's no reason not to. But the main strength of this is actually all the interlocking parts and not necessarily the glue itself. Now you don't want to get too much on here, as you don't want glue just squirting out of the edges. But you do want an even amount there. Okay, so now we're going to put this back on here. Alright, and this is actually the trickiest part, is getting this to click into place. Okay, so that's in there. There we go. Okay, so that's one fin. Now we've got a little bit of goo there. Alright, and if I look down, we want to make sure that everything is straight and in place. So it looks like everything's connected there. If you've got excess cement on there, I would just take that off with a little bit of tissue paper. That looks okay. And now we're just going to repeat it with the other two fins. Okay, so everything looks pretty good there. I'll raise this up just a bit. Okay, so everything should be well seated. And it appears to be. Now on this one we've got a bit of a gap. I think it's just the tube may be depressed a little bit there. For now, I'm going to leave it alone because the cardboard may work its way back up there itself. Let's see if I can just get a finger under there. Okay. If the gap remains later, we can come in and fill that with a little bit of plastic model putty. Okay. Now at the same time here we can go ahead and put on the launch lugs. Now to do this I'm going to put this up on a stand so that I'm not putting pressure onto the fins. Alright, so we get our square launch lugs here. Alright, and so here we're just going to put a bead all around the base there. And those will just go into the slots. You might want to hold them there for just a minute or two. And we'll do the same over here. Let's try to bounce out of there. I'm not sure what it's doing. Let's roughen that a little bit. Okay, now I'm going to look down the length. Right, the aft one is leaning a little bit. Let's try and move that over. Better. Alright, so at this point I'm going to let everything dry, and then when we come back we'll finish by putting on the rail guides there. The glue for the launch lugs has dried, and now I'm going to use them as guides here. So my first is about 3 centimeters from the aft end. And then the second is at about 27.5. And so I'll use those measurements for my rail guides as well. Okay, so 3 is going to be right here. And then 27.5 is going to be right here. Okay, now unlike the launch lugs, the base of these is actually rounded to go against the tube. So these should, in theory, actually be easier to put on than the other ones were. Once again, I'm going to go ahead and use the gel super glue here. And these have no directionality, so we can put them on either way. There's no actual forward or backward here. Okay, so here I'm just going to move this up a little bit and then center the line within the groove. Okay, so that can rest there. And I'm going to do the same thing again with the forward launch lug. Apply some super glue to that. once again centering it on the line. Oh, I'm about to glue my fingers there. It really hasn't been a good super glue experience if I haven't glued my fingers on at least once. Alright, so now once again I'm going to let these dry, and in the meantime I'm going to finish the sanding work on the nose cone. While the launch lug and rail guides were drying, I went ahead and finished the work on the priming of the nose cone. So this has had 4 coats of primer, and then it has been wet sanded, first with 320 grit, then with 400 grit sandpaper, and this has left us with a very nice smooth finish. You could even sand this further up to about 600 grit and make it even smoother. I would prefer to do that after I paint it, actually, but that's up to you. Now, for this video, I am not going to do any further painting on the rocket. We've had some really strange weather move into Arkansas, where we alternate between very cold weather and snow and less cold weather and rain, and it's just not good for painting conditions. So I may make a second part to this video later on that includes the painting, finishing, and decals. So both the rail guides and the launch lugs are on, and you can leave them the way they are here. If you want to add fillets, you can, although putting fillets on from plastic to cardboard, you'd almost have to use epoxy. You could use white glue or wood glue, but that's not going to stick to the plastic really. I'm just going to leave them the way they are. And since we're not going to paint this right away, I'm going to go ahead and finish things. Now, one of the things you might need to do is kind of bend the fins a little bit. I noticed this one had a little bit of a wave to it. And as I mentioned earlier, we do have some gaps here, and I will fill those with plastic model contour putty when I get ready to paint the model. I won't worry about it for this video. So one of the last things we need to do is put on our aftmost centering ring. And just like the other parts of this, we're going to use some super glue. Now, one of the things I noticed, it looks like maybe I got a little super glue down in here and it's made a little ridge. So I'm just going to take an emery file here, fingernail file, and just kind of knock that ridge back down. Okay, and then we'll try the ring again. And that notch can go anywhere since we're using a screw-on retainer. Now the body tube is a little bit warped here. I'm not quite sure why. Okay, there we go. Okay, so I've got that on, and we're just going to push that all the way down until it hits the fin tabs. Okay, now here again, they use the super glue to put this together. You can also use epoxy here, and I think that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to go off screen for just a moment here and make up some epoxy. One other thing I'm going to change here is, this is an Estes polycarbonate 29mm retaining ring. Now I'm going to substitute it for the aluminum one that came with it. Not because there's anything wrong with it at all. In fact, the reason is because the aluminum ones are a little bit smaller in diameter, whereas these ones on, say, a BT60 type kit, the knobs here stick out just a little bit beyond the kit. Now, since this is a 3-inch diameter kit here, they're not going to stick out. And so I'm saving the metal one for smaller diameter rockets that I'll be building later. Okay, but that'll be after we do the motor mount here. So again, I'm going to go off camera really quickly here, make up some epoxy, and then come back. I've made up 10 grams of 15-minute epoxy. And my plan here is to simply allow this to flow down and around. So let me move my camera just a little bit more here. Okay, now I am wearing gloves. Epoxy on your skin can cause some allergic-like reactions if you keep doing it. You could use either a longer or a shorter acting epoxy here. If you're doing 5 minutes, you got to work really quickly, and it may not get into all the nooks and crannies that we want before it cures. You could also use 30-minute epoxy. It's just going to take longer. Now I've got that little slot there. We'll see what that does. So 15-minute epoxy is kind of a compromise here between speed and flowability. Keep bumping the camera there. Sorry guys, it looks like you're shaking all over the place. Alright, so here I'm just going to spread it around. Now try not to get it up onto the motor mount tube too far. And I keep doing what exactly what I say not to. Okay, and I think I have enough here that I can also do the motor mount. Now some people like to wait until the very last minute to put the motor mount on, so they go ahead and paint it all first. I'm going to go ahead and put this on. Now I'm going to move this just a little bit. I'm go ahead and keep the camera here. Alright, now before I put this on, I'm going to take some sandpaper here and just sand the inside of the retainer male end. This will be the end that gets attached to the rocket. And this is just going to provide a little bit better surface to which the epoxy can adhere. Now if you're using the metal one that came with it, that's fine too. And do the same type of thing. Just give it a little sanding. Now you can use anything from about 60 to 100 grit. I think I've got, and that's actually 150. I'm going to need something a little coarser. Alright, so here I've gone down to 100. Yeah, mainly we just want to scratch that surface so it's no longer smooth. Okay, so now, move this up a bit. You get to see how messy my work area is here. Alright, now we want to apply the epoxy to the tube, not to the retainer, so that excess epoxy will get squished to the outside and down the tube and not on the inside of the tube where it's going to interfere with the motor itself. Okay. Alright, so now we just add the retainer on there, squish it down till it stops, and now I'm just going to set this aside and allow it to cure, and then we'll move on while that's curing to preparing the shock cord and the parachute. while the epoxy is curing, I'm going to work on the parachute here. Now this is supposed to be a 22-inch diameter parachute. It is a hexagon shaped. Okay, and the way they have us do it is to simply tie the parachute here onto a section of the shock cord. Okay, so if we got our shock cord here, what they're having us do is simply wrap this around the shock cord, pull the loops through. It's already getting tangled up. I'll give you a preview. I'm not going to do it this way. Okay, but their idea is then this would just simply tie up around the shock cord like that. I don't like that at all. If you're going to tie it permanently, tie it to the nose cone. Now I know why they're doing it is it's to allow the nose cone to kind of bobble down below instead of sticking out to the side. Okay, now if you've seen my other rocketry videos, you know that I really like snap swivels to put on my parachutes. So what I'm going to do here is just open this up again and find all the loops, because now they're all tangled since we tried to tie it to the shock cord. Alright, so I'm going to take all the loops here, stick them around one finger. Alright, and then I'm going to kind of move this around until all those corners are aligned as we can get them. Alright, they don't have to be perfect, and they probably won't be. Alright, but that's pretty close there. Okay, so now, here I have a #1 snap swivel. That's basically the largest you're going to find without going to quick links and such. Okay, and the main thing to consider is this snap part here has to go over the nose cone eyelet, and I've already tested it to make sure, but we'll put it on here in just a moment. Alright, I'm going to pass my loops here through the swivel end in this round eyelet, and this is just barely big enough. So this parachute is kind of right on the verge of needing something heavier or not. Alright, and then we're going to put the entire snap swivel through the loops. Alright, and then we're going to pull those down, and it's going to give us a nice knot in here. Now, also, if you've seen some of my other videos, for smaller rockets, I'll just put a little dab of glue on here to keep that knot from moving. On bigger ones, I'll use a bit of heat shrink tubing there. I'm not quite decided what I'm going to do with that yet. All right, but before we do anything that makes this permanent, we'll go back here, pull tightly on this, and make sure it's where we want it. Okay, and it looks like it actually slipped a little bit. So if it does, you can simply loosen this. Alright, bring that back through, get your loops once more. Okay, and then again, kind of shift things back and forth until you get it where you want it. And then you can put that back on again. Alright. So I think I am going to use some heat shrink tubing on this. So we'll just take that off momentarily. Alright, so this is a bit of heat shrink tubing that's about, what we got there, about 1 inch. And this stuff comes in varying lengths and diameters. So pick one that's appropriate to your shroud line size. You want to be able to stick the shroud lines through that fairly easily, but not so easily that it just slides around all over the place. Alright, now I'm going to come back once more and check my measurements. Okay, and you might actually need to gather up all the corners in your hand here and then pull it tight. Okay, so there's my heat shrink tubing. I'm just going to allow that to slide around for a moment. Okay, I'm going to come back and put my snap swivel back on there. pull that through. Okay, pull that knot down tight again. And if it comes up around there, that's not a big deal. Okay, and now I'm going to move that heat shrink tubing right up to that knot. And I'm actually going to cover that bottom part of the snap swivel. Now I may need to move things around a little bit. Just take it patiently. Okay, so there I've covered the whole knot. Alright, I do want to make sure that this still swivels around there, and it does. Okay, and now we just need to apply some heat here. I just use a butane lighter. Alright, we don't want to catch it on fire, we just want to heat it up. You can also use a hair dryer or a heat gun set on low. Although for something this small, I found that the lighter is actually probably the best for control. Just be careful that you don't melt or burn the shroud lines there. And the good thing about this is that it's a semi-permanent fix for the snap swivel and the parachute there. But if you do need to change things, you can just slit this with a knife and remove it. So it makes it a little bit more versatile than just gluing it. But I do recommend either gluing it or using this method. Otherwise, these nylon lines tend to slip really easily. They don't hold on to the knot very well. Okay, so let that cool for just a few seconds. Alright, and then just to show you what I mean here, we're going to open this up. Alright, and that has to go on the nose cone eyelet. And when we close it, it needs to be able to move freely. If it's binding, then you need a bigger clip there. Our final step in construction here is to attach the remainder of the shock cord and the nose cone. So for the shock cord here, I'm taking the elastic piece, and the first thing I'm going to do is simply tie a loop in one end, much like we did with the Kevlar. Okay, and just pull that tight. I'm not going to worry about putting any glue on this knot, as since this is elastic, it's holding itself fairly well. Pass this over. Alright, and pass the other end of the shock cord through. Okay, and then we'll just tie those, or pull those two loops together there. Alright, and that gives us a really good connection. Then we're going to take the nose cone, and I've got the parachute attached there. I'm going to go ahead and leave that in place. Alright, you don't have to. You can do the parachute later. Well, in fact, since I made this removable, I'm going to go ahead and remove this now. Alright, now I'm just going to tie this on a double knot, or 2 half hitches. Okay, and again, there's not really a need to glue this. It's not going to go anywhere. Right, then we'll reattach the parachute here. And now I'm not prepping for flight, so I'm not going to do this in a particularly effective way. I'm just going to loosely bind this around. Alright, then we can put our shock cord down in there. Followed by our parachute. Now remember, this has an ejection baffle built into the motor mount, so we don't need to worry about chute protectors or wadding. Alright, I'm just going to slide that together. Okay, and so here we go from nose to tail. This is our completed rocket. Now, as the weather gets better in the spring here, I will probably do another video on painting and adding the decals to this, but I don't want to commit to it yet. So I'm just going to go ahead and end this video here, and I hope you have a great flight and a safe recovery, and please stay tuned for more of my videos.